And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your late Monday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So I was looking up famous birthdays just now, and there's some great ones. On this day in 1530, Ivan the Terrible was born. But I am not going to talk. What am I going to talk about? I'm not going to talk about Ivan the Terrible. It's just kind of funny that was the first person when I looked up famous birthdays today, Ivan the Terrible. Great stuff. Now, I should also point out from the film savant perspective, there were two movies that were shot back to back and belly to belly about Ivan the Terrible, and they were directed by, a guy who could lay claim to being the most innovative, influential filmmaker of the first part of the 20th century, the silent period, Sergei Eisenstein. Sergei Eisenstein directed Ivan the Terrible Parts 1 and 2. And the fact that I know the name of the actor, Nikolai Cherkasov, I don't know what that says about me other than I do have a lot of go back to Walbrook, stay with Charlie Babbitt, savant tendencies, but also born on this day, 95 years ago today, on August 25th, 1930, a legit all-timer in the movie business, a fantastic actor, and a great movie star, and a man who, along with a peer, Steve McQueen, helped to define cool for generations. On this day, 1930, Sean Connery was born. And Connery, he's on the top tier of greatest movie stars in the history of cinema. He's got to be in the top 10. It's difficult to quantify when you have an individual such as Connery, and to some extent his buddy Clint Eastwood, you could say similar things about him, where you had somebody who became a brand name because of a franchise. In his case, the OG James Bond, even though technically David Niven played James Bond in the original version of Casino Royale. Those who think that, and this is not a criticism, that Daniel Craig was the only James Bond in Casino Royale. Well, in the 1960s version of Casino Royale, which was played as farce, David Niven plays James Bond, and no less than Woody Allen himself. And Woody was a kid. He looks like grad student age. I don't even know if he was even 30, but he was a genius writer, and he must have done, maybe he took a crack at the script. The history is a little vague on this, but Woody Allen plays a character in the movie called Jimmy Bond. Now, you can reboot The Matrix, and maybe Woody Allen should have played a young James Bond in Casino Royale instead of David Niven, although David Niven in his prime would have been on the short list of perfect British actors to play Bond, along with, of course, Archibald Leach, a.k.a. Cary Grant. But what Sean Connery did in the first run of Bond films, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, most famously Goldfinger, and then going forward from there, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever. Connery was just about the biggest star, not only in Hollywood, but around the world, because the success of the Bond films. And Goldfinger was, there are some who would argue it was the first true blockbuster. I don't really agree with that. That's not a sentiment that I share. I don't just mean raw box office numbers. To me, if I'm asked the question, what's the first true blockbuster? I'm going to say Jaws. And I could give you an hour's worth of the whys, just in my opinion, because that was a movie that changed the business. The Exorcist 2 years earlier changed the business. I don't think that Goldfinger actually changed the movie business, but it was different. It was a level of excitement in an action movie, a spy thriller that really hadn't been done before. So Connery, in his first run of playing James Bond, which goes through 1971's Diamonds Are Forever, he just showed a command on screen where the character, yes, he could be funny in the way of Daniel Craig occasionally has a few moments of humor, but it was the intensity, it was the brutality, the kind of, if you want to say alpha male, well, yeah, I would say that James Bond, even as written by Ian Fleming, excuse me, geez, that's pathetic, almost forgot the name of the author, but the character is written as somebody who does not like being told what to do, even though his whole process is he's fulfilling assignments for Her Majesty's government. He's not just some random guy who doesn't like being told what to do. And this is an interesting twist when they had Dame Judi Dench play M in the later run of Bond films. Man, that was fucking genius, if you ask me. Because Bond is a misogynist. He's presented as a misogynist. As much as Connery is a likable performer, and even when he does unlikable things, usually the villains that Connery's Bond faces are pretty horrendous. I mean, Auric Goldfinger, not exactly the kind of guy that you want to have over for tea and crumpets. But Connery didn't have to do that much acting in the Bond films. He did a lot of reacting and a lot of, a henchman gets electrocuted and a little Arnold Schwarzenegger before Arnold Schwarzenegger, he had to split. Well, Sean Connery, when he electrocutes a bad guy, shocking, positively shocking. But Connery didn't want to be typecast. And it's very important because Eastwood also was very canny, and he didn't want to just be the guy who could make Westerns with a phenomenal Italian filmmaker in Sergio Leone. Eastwood, as his career took off in the 60s, they're born in the same year. That's the other parallel with them. And Clint born in May of 1930, supposedly still looking at scripts. The guy is 95. But you know what? Juror Number 2 was the best film that he made since Sully. So I hope that he makes another movie. I hope that his health, holds out. But Connery didn't just want to make Bond films, is the point. And you look at Sean in that era. Did you know he did an Alfred Hitchcock film? Unless you're an egghead like me, you probably did know, or a Hitchcock completist. He co-starred with Tippi Hedren in Marnie, which was Hitchcock's follow-up to The Birds. Now, it's not as good as, Hitchcock's kind of extraordinary run of 3 movies, which if you want to include The Birds, but he had Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Psycho, back to back to back, and a belly to belly to belly. Man, the John Sterling references are coming on here fast and furious today. But Marnie is a film where Connery, after I think he had done 2 Bond films when he shot Marnie, he plays against the image. This is something that he clearly was preoccupied with. He didn't want to keep going to the same or similar kind of well. He was striving to do different things and make movies that were not just about one lone male hero saving the world. He wanted to get into very serious and sometimes gray area stuff. And Marnie, his character is not exactly he's not really that good of a guy. You could argue that he's horrendous in the way that he catches this young woman. She's a kleptomaniac, the character that Tippi Hedren plays, and he more or less adopts her against her will. Hey, you better do what I want. You better do what I want, or else I'm going to tell the police. So I guess I caught you, as he says, almost delivering lines like James Bond. You're like a little butterfly, and I've caught you. Yeah, great guy. I remember watching the movie in film school, and most of the students were horrified. This guy's horrible. What the fuck is wrong with this guy? Well, what's wrong with Marnie, and what's wrong with Sean Connery's Mark Rutland? But he did another film later in the 60s, while he was still, number 1 James Bond. He didn't back away from the role till after Diamonds Are Forever. He did a movie with Sidney Lumet. A little bit of a different film. Sidney Lumet was Mr. New York even before Woody Allen and Spike Lee made their names shooting almost every film in New York, in one of the boroughs, of course. Connery plays an officer who is in a prison camp. I think it's World War II. I don't think it's Korea, but I could be wrong about that. And it is an entirely, again, a totally different process. Now, this character is heroic. He's not a bad guy, but he's put into an untenable situation with a commanding officer type who is just awful. This guy is beyond horrible. And it becomes a sort of battle of wills, a little bit of an Officer and a Gentleman vibe, but much darker. As much as, Louis Gossett Jr. won the supporting actor Oscar, and his character is not the nicest guy to Richard Gere's mayonnaise. The character, I can't remember the tough screw's name in The Hill, is way worse, because there's no part of him that wants to do anything other than just bust these guys up and down. It's really grueling. It's a very difficult watch, but fantastic film. And there are those that would put it in the Sidney Lumet. It's not 12 Angry Men, but what could be. But in the sort of top tier of Sidney Lumet, classic films, whether it's Q&A or Prince of the City or films of that nature. Even Night Falls on Manhattan from the 90s was very, very good. And his last film with Vin Diesel, Find Me Guilty. film that's now more than 20 years old. When I mention how when somebody becomes a brand name, when somebody takes on an iconic role and doesn't just play a part a bunch of times, but they inhabit the character, seemingly body, mind, and soul. Sean Connery had a full career. He had a fantastic run on the A-list with the first iteration of James Bond films, and then movies, let's say, the Sidney Lumet's The Hill, and then films in the 70s like The Man Who Would Be King with Sir Michael Caine. Funny, they ended up both getting knighted. And then, Great Train Robbery, Robin and Marion, the last film that Audrey Hepburn made for 13 years until Spielberg, I don't know how he did it, somehow managed to get her to come out of retirement for the movie Always with his buddy from Jaws, Richard Dreyfuss. But Connery was always testing his limits. And there were a lot of projects that he talked about and wanted to get made that just didn't end up happening. But he was still playing conventional leading man roles in the manner of Cary Grant when he was kind of past an age where you would expect it. You look at a film such as The Russia House, which he made, I think that was the last film he shot before The Hunt for Red October. We sail into history! I think it's the last film he shot before Hunt for Red October, and he's presented as significantly older, of course, than Michelle Pfeiffer, but it works because Connery just had that. He had an air about him, not an air of superiority, but just a sense that he knew which end was up. And it didn't feel, even Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which was the movie I think he shot before The Russia House, the fact that his character hooks up with the doctor who can't be more than 30, we go with it. It's funny because Indy freaks out when he realizes, Jesus, the father and the son hooked up with the same doctor, the same woman. What are we doing here? Well, I'm as human as the next man. I was the next man. I mean, just gold, solid gold. But he made interesting choices. He did films like Wrong is Right, a movie that I think at some point is going to be rediscovered because it deals with the role of media in shaping news stories, not just covering news stories. Hence the title, Wrong is Right. If you sell the con long enough, when the legend becomes fact, what? When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. In other words, facts, we don't need no stinking facts. Who gives a shit? If it bleeds, it leads. Follow this. But then, in his mid-50s, Connery was cast as Jimmy Malone in Brian De Palma's The Untouchables. And if you want to say the last act, it really was only, Connery's career is in 2 acts. Movie star, and then Untouchables and forward. And so he was cast, and I should point out The Untouchables is before the movies I just mentioned. I don't mean to confuse you. Sometimes the brain works and we don't put things exactly in chronological order. But sometime in 1986, Brian De Palma was casting The Untouchables, and he had Costner, and he thought he had Bobby D to play Capone. But there was a chance because De Niro, not surprisingly, was so busy during that era. He was so busy. Brazil with Terry Gilliam was a very difficult shoot that took a lot of his time. The Mission for Roland Joffe shooting overseas, that was also not easy. And he was working on Angel Heart with another guy who was knighted, the late, great Sir Alan Parker. And they didn't know how long it was going to take to complete that film. Although De Niro doesn't have a ton of scenes, that was running long. There were some issues. So De Palma cast De Niro, and he had Costner as Elliot Ness, and Andy Garcia, Charles Martin Smith, and he thought he had De Niro, but he needed a backup plan. Connery was signed, sealed, and delivered. So the story with that goes is that Brian De Palma somehow managed to convince the studio to give him $500,000, offer the role of Capone to the guy who should have been the first person, no offense to De Niro in this instance, because I love him in that film, but Bob Hoskins. Bob Hoskins kind of looked like the real Al Capone. I don't know why they didn't just cast him, because he was so incredible as the most terrifying British gangster in the history of movies in the film The Long Good Friday. Harry Shand, great name for a character, Harry Shand in The Long Good Friday. So Bob Hoskins, basically, I think it was $250,000 now that I'm thinking about it. He made $250,000 just for keeping a slot in his schedule open in case Mr. De Niro can't do The Untouchables. But who did The Untouchables was De Niro, was Kevin Costner, was Andy Garcia, Charles Martin Smith, and Sean Connery. So it's difficult to explain. You take a Scottish legend, James Bond, who had played James Bond. I forgot to mention, he made a renegade Bond film, a kind of a comeback. It's not technically canon, but it is. It's a Bond film. Never Say Never Again, which I actually have in my top 5 favorite Bonds. I love it. Connery is amazing. You know, he's in his early 50s. He's older, but he's still super suave. You know, ladies' man. He still had that kind of fit look from his youth. It's tremendous. But for Sean Connery to effect a believable Irish accent, I don't know how he did it, but he sounds more Irish in The Untouchables. He still sounds Scottish in Hunt for Red October 3 years later. Even though his character is not Russian, he's Lithuanian, as one of my friends kept pointing out, because I kept mistakenly thinking, oh yeah, he plays a Russian sub commander. No. He commands the sub for Russia, but he is not actually from Russia. It's an important distinction. So The Untouchables was a significant box office hit, and it was a big one for De Palma. It gave him a little bit more breathing space and allowed him to make more big movies. You know, Wise Guys kind of bombed. Scarface, obviously an iconic film, which I think is not very good. I made the Al Pacino reference, early on, Fush You Meng and all of that. That's De Palma directed that too. But De Palma he was able to make movies like Casualties of War, it was not much hope that was going to be a box office success. I want to talk about a depressing war movie. Casualties of War is down there or up there with the most depressing war movies ever made. Wow. But The Untouchables was a significant box office hit. It is a gorgeously mounted production. They had the confidence of the big budget and as much time as they needed. De Palma, a perfectionist, shots had to look a certain way. And that famous sequence of the baby carriage was more or less a replica of a famous sequence. And I mentioned him earlier. It's funny how these names keep repeating, of Sergei Eisenstein. I think it was from the movie Potemkin. It was the same. De Palma liked to do this. He liked to pay homage, pay tribute to fellow filmmakers and famous scenes in films in his own work. And if you don't know that there is an antecedent, the scene with the baby carriage in Untouchables is extraordinary. It's pure cinema. It's gorgeous. But Connery got buzz, and if you go back to reviews from when the Untouchables came out, people were saying this guy might win an Oscar. He's past his prime. He's not going to play any more leading man roles. He's not going to play any more James Bond movies. But my God, he is phenomenal in this film. Some variation on that. Almost every major critic said when The Untouchables came out. And to the surprise of no one, the former James Bond, former world box office #1, Sean Connery, won an Oscar. And I'm pretty sure that was his only nomination. One nomination, one win. I don't think he had any other Oscar nominations in his career. I'm pretty sure he didn't. But the irony is he did play more leads going forward. He is the lead in The Russia House. And, I think that I would consider him the lead in The Hunt for Red October. I don't know who has more screen time, him or Alec Baldwin's Jack Ryan. But it feels like, because the story pivots around Ramius, that's the character Connery plays, it pivots more around Ramius than it does around Alec Baldwin's Jack Ryan. It's a leading role. And then Medicine Man in 92, not altogether successful. That was, I believe, John McTiernan, whose next movie was Last Action Hero with Arnold, which is a fantastic film, but that bombed at the box office. But McTiernan, Hunt for Red October, 1990. He did Die Hard. He did Predator with Arnold. And he did a film with, speaking of James Bond, Pierce Brosnan in 86 called Nomads, which is not entirely successful, but it showed McTiernan as a visionary talent. Connery was James Bond, and then he won an Oscar doing something completely different. And he wasn't necessarily known as a great actor, but neither was Clint, and neither was Costner, neither was Gary Cooper. It's not always about Daniel Day-Lewis level of ability and range. Sometimes it's how you look on screen, how you portray certain characters, and a willingness to take risks. It's not always about giving the fans and giving audiences what they want. It's about sometimes doing different things, such as Connery working with Hitchcock playing a heel character, and then the difficult film that he did with Lumet, and the kind of spoofy satire. Well, Zardoz, where he's running around in a loincloth. Outland, which was, he plays, basically it's High Noon in space. He plays a sheriff of literally the planet Jupiter, or on the planet Jupiter. All of these different films, working a lot of the times with big filmmakers like John Borman or Peter Hyams, who did Outland. And there are certain major stars who pretty much work until the end of their lives, that they don't stop. And in this instance, there are parallels between Connery and the aforementioned Cary Grant. I would say that, I mean, if somebody puts a gun to my head, who's the greatest movie star in the history of cinema? I mean, I could say Tom Cruise, but if I don't say Tom Cruise, I'm going to say Cary Grant. I think Cary Grant is like the all-time, that's the guy. But Cary Grant reached a point in his 60s where he didn't want to do it anymore. And he almost retired in the 50s. It was Hitchcock who got him out of retirement to do North by Northwest, and then he worked for another 6 or 7 years. But Cary Grant he wasn't even 70 when he called it a career. He was, I think his last film, Walk, Don't Run, was Cary born in 1904, 1903? I don't remember, but he was, when he made Charade, I think he was 60. So, yeah, he would have been about 63 or 64 when he called it a career. He just had enough. And he didn't regret the fact that he walked away. Cary got married to, Diane Cannon, Jack Nicholson's favorite fellow Lakers fan, and they had a daughter. And Cary spent the last 2 decades of his life being I can't say being a normal father to his daughter. He traveled around the world with her because he was Cary Grant. She had lived a life, Jennifer Grant, that you can't even imagine. The number of princes and kings and heads of state that she met because everyone was such a big fan of her old man. I can't even imagine what that would have been like. But Sean Connery didn't need to work in the same way that he didn't need to continue to play James Bond. And the Roger Moore era is what started films like Man with a Golden Gun, Live and Let Die. I love Roger Moore, but I don't think Roger Moore was very good as James Bond. And I, of course, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the film with George Lazenby. There are many that have that in their all-time Bond top 5. The incredible stunt work, and it's a really good involving story, and it has a surprise ending that most people certainly wouldn't see coming even watching the movie now. But Connery didn't need it. He wanted to work. He had to believe in the projects that he was doing. And through the 90s, he found a lot of projects that he really liked, such as when he did The Rock with Nicolas Cage. He was basically playing like almost a James Bond, a British agent known as Mason, but what a lot of people said at the time, this could be in Dr. No or From Russia with Love, where one of the bad guys like Blofeld has him in a gulag and he never escaped. And this is supposed to be like a James Bond character because he's fucking lethal. Like, you don't want to mess with this guy. Forget that. Then he did like Finding Forrester, and he did Entrapment with Ving Rhames and Catherine Zeta-Jones. And I guess he just didn't want the grind anymore. And his last movie, unfortunately, he was 72, I believe, when it was shot, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, with a filmmaker I like who did the original Blade and directed it beautifully, Stephen Norrington. And there were reports at the time that Connery and the director were not getting along, and supposedly they actually brawled, and Connery got the better end of it from what I read. Honestly, I can't imagine anybody crossing him. And Connery could be difficult, but he didn't actually have a reputation for being a problem on sets. So I don't know if Norrington was just, because like, for example, David O. Russell, brilliant filmmaker, there have been issues with him and various people. And you say, well, what's the common denominator? Nobody really knows what went wrong with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Unfortunately, the film's just not that good. And as swan songs go, it's sad that that's the last film Connery made. He almost would have been better off if his last film was a movie like Finding Forrester, which many people had as one of the best films of 2000. A really wholesome, good-natured, and I guess to some extent a heartwarming story. Finding Forrester, that's certainly one to look up, and also showed that Connery could play an academic as believable as any other role that he could play. Now, I mentioned and have talked about on my social media that when I think of Connery, like when he passed, which was, I think, right before Halloween in 2020, news kind of came over the wires. A legend has passed in Sean Connery. My first thought was not James Bond. My second thought was not James Bond or Oscar winner for The Untouchables. I thought of Henry Jones Sr., the father of Indiana Jones. And it's a role that Connery only played the one time in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And he doesn't even show up for the first, 40 minutes of movie. I believe that is the best performance of his career. And it's probably my favorite Indiana Jones film because of the connection between Indy and his father. And yeah, Connery doesn't look old enough to be Harrison's dad. I understand that. But they sell it. The chemistry between the two men was fantastic. And they have the banter and the byplay, which it feels natural. It feels real. It feels like these two guys in real life, they liked each other. And not surprisingly, Harrison Ford, going back to 1989, has done nothing but talk about what a great guy. What a great guy Connery was. He talked to me like I was his son, like he was trying to get into character. He said, I love that man. And other people over time, Ben Stiller, Alec Baldwin. I mean, Alec worked with him, but Ben Stiller didn't work with him. And there are pictures of them at various years' U.S. Opens, the tennis championships going on right now, where they were seated together. He retired from movies, but he didn't retire from life. And he was still active and still seemed much like himself, well into, like, let's say the 2015, 2016 range. And then his public appearances became a little more sparse. But I want to say before closing this that for a number of years, there was talk, because there was always talk, because Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was a stupendous film, and from the box office perspective, but just an enormous runaway, like it was an even bigger hit than they expected. So there were a number of screenplays written for a fourth Indiana Jones film. What ended up getting made, Crystal Skull, I'm not a fan of it. I see what they were doing. I just didn't think the film worked, despite the strength of the cast. There was another one, Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. Ridiculous title, but I'm sure it would have been better than Crystal Skull. But there were other ideas. Quentin Tarantino had some ideas. M. Night Shyamalan, near the beginning of his career in the Sixth Sense era, he had some ideas for a fourth Indiana Jones film. And there was a script, and I don't think it was the Saucer Men from Mars one, but there was an indie script which Spielberg got to Sean Connery and more or less begged him to come out of retirement. This would have been not long after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Please, we need you. And Connery just said, Steve, I love you, or words to that effect, but it's just too much fun being retired. I just don't want to work anymore, man. I'm sorry. This is it. I've had enough. And that was it. He didn't come back. So he was healthy for probably another dozen years after he retired. And, 72 or 73, Harrison Ford's 83 and he's still working a full schedule. Everyone does it differently. But Sir Sean Connery, I don't know what year he was knighted. Really one of a kind. A great movie star, a terrific film actor, and real cool cat who competed in the 1953 amateur Mr. Universe, a contest that was won by a huge, speaking of iconic names in the bodybuilding world, Bill Pearl. Imagine Sean Connery, 007, competed on a bodybuilding stage, didn't compete well. Bill Pearl was twice his size. Connery had a really nice physique, though, just, didn't look anything like Bill Pearl. But happy 95th in memoriam to Sir Sean Connery, the OG James Bond, Oscar winner, and just a fantastic movie star and a real character. This has been episode 599 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Monday late afternoon here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, shaken, not stirred. Peace.